Good morning, Year 11. So today is going to be slightly different. I'm going to talk over the PowerPoint presentation in the format of this video, and I'm going to go through your key tasks today, but also going to have some discussion of some key ideas as well. So I give you your instructions as we go through. Remember, please, before you start, to download the worksheet and the handout that you need in order to do your work today. So what we're going to look at today is what work Martin Luther King did in the North, following on from last lesson, looking at the riots that broke out across the United States in the 1960s. Then we're also going to look at the impact of his assassination. So your Do It Now task is to have a little recap of the riots that we looked at last lesson. Based on what we looked at, can you match the following statistics to their correct description? So you have 4 different numbers and 4 different descriptions. Can you match them up together? You can pause the video here, give yourself a couple of moments to go through this, and then we will shortly go through those answers. Okay, to quickly go through those key statistics. So the 4-year period that these riots took place across, around $45 million worth of damage was done to property in the United States. 3,500 was the number of injured people in these violent clashes that took place during the demonstrations. 172 was the number of cities where there were demonstrations, so that's how many cities a demonstration took place in. And then lastly, 27,000 was the number of people that were arrested across America during these demonstrations. So those figures really kind of exemplify how significant these riots were, how many of them took place, and how large scale this was during the 1960s. Okay, so what your first task is to look at what Martin Luther King's work was in the North. Now, King's campaign in the North was caused because he was shocked by his visit to Watts. Remember, Watts was an area in Los Angeles where we looked at the riot last lesson. King wanted to show, really, that non-violent direct action could still produce results. So it was an attempt to stop these riots and redirect their thinking about their course of action. So what you can do here, please, is read through the handout from Go for Schools. It's pages 72 and 73 to start off with. And this information will help inform you to complete the gap-fill activity and then the successes and failures box on your worksheet. I'd give yourself around 10 to 15 minutes to do this. So you can just pause the video here and then resume once you are done. Now, when you're looking at the failure and successes, you're thinking about how overall successful the campaign was. Now, King spoke of his campaign as if it were a success because there had been some peaceful demonstrations, but there were obviously some quite significant failures which you will figure out from the reading that you're about to do. So once you're done, you can resume the video and we will move on to our next task. The second task is to have a look at the impact of Martin Luther King's assassination. Now, what we're going to do is play a video, and all I would like you to do whilst watching this video is write down as many points as you can hear about the impact or the aftermath of this assassination, and we will then discuss some key points afterwards. The video is about 5 minutes long, so whilst you're watching, there is space on your worksheet to jot down these ideas, please. Okay, so the main points to take away from that video is that, if they killed a man like Martin Luther King, who believed in no violence, peaceful protest, and was training and educating thousands of people, then it just demonstrated that they still had no respect for their views and their wishes, because such a prominent figure being assassinated, it suggests that people are still unhappy with the views of Martin Luther King, which means, therefore, that Black Americans are still going to face that inequality. Another point is that, the riots that ensued after Martin Luther King's assassination was this message that if they don't listen, then the riots will ensue, the riots will continue. They felt at this point that that was the only way to get their message across. And the result of decades of mistreatment, the murder of Martin Luther King, was this final straw. So, to use the phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back, the years and years and years and centuries of this mistreatment of Black Americans and their fight for getting equal treatment and equal rights in society was, therefore, they'd had enough at this point, because Martin Luther King was their figurehead, he was their leader, he was their source of hope and inspiration, and his assassination, obviously, and quite understandably so, was the source of a lot of anger and upset amongst this community. So, to go into some more depth and get some more understanding about this event, you need to read page 74 and 75 and then answer the following 5 questions. When and where was he killed? What had he been currently working on? How had this changed from previous campaigns? Find and note down 4 key impacts of King's death, and what do these impacts tell us about his influence? So read page 74 and 75 of the handout, and then you can answer these questions. There is space for that on the worksheet for you to do. For the find and note down 4 key impacts of King's death, that will become apparent from reading those textbook pages. All you need to do is list down, some of the short-term impacts and some of the later impacts. Remember, short-term is what happens immediately after an event, and then later impact is, several years perhaps after an event takes place. What is his impact there? Okay, task number 4 is looking at some interpretations about the progress of civil rights by the 1970s. So, as we know, paper 3 is a source-based paper. Now, one of your popular questions is to list and be able to read interpretations and list the ways in which they differ. Now, you'll have to write that up as a full-on answer, but practice for that is being able to read and interpret these 2 sources and, put into your own words, how are they different? And then further to that, which we'll look on a bit later, is why are they different, which is where you start to consider the provenance of these sources. So, interpretation 1 is from The American Dream in 1996 by historian Esmond Wright. He is considering, like interpretation 2 will, whether there had been progress in the civil rights by the mid-1970s, so that's after Martin Luther King's death. Despite the civil rights gains of the 1960s, however, racial discrimination and repression remained a significant factor in American life. Even after President Johnson declared a war on poverty and King initiated a Poor People's Campaign in 1968, the distribution of the nation's wealth and income moved towards greater inequality in the 1970s. Civil rights advocates acknowledged that segregation had not brought forward significant improvement in the lives of poor blacks. Interpretation 2 is from The Civil Rights Movement by 2004, and this is by historian Mark Newman. By the early 1970s, the African American struggle for equality had made some significant gains. Between 1964 and 1970, the number of Southern black elected officials had increased from fewer than 25 to over 700. Racist demagoguery language declined in Southern elections, and white candidates increasingly sought to attract black voters. By 1972, most Southern states had moderate executives, these are state officials. Andrew Young, who had resigned from the SCLC in 1970 to enter politics, was elected to the US House of Representatives in 1972. A year later, Maynard Jackson became Atlanta's first African American mayor. So, what you have to do is look at these two interpretations and decide. Hopefully, it is quite obvious what the main differences are between these two interpretations. Two different viewpoints about the same event, considering how much progress there was by the 1970s with regards to civil rights. Now, to help you go through those two interpretations, you're first considering what's the main difference between these views. So, to set this out as an answer, you will use a direct quote. So, there is an example on your worksheet that you can read through for how to lay it out. But you might start off by saying interpretation 1 says, that's where you'll pick a quote to use in your answer. And then you explain what that quote means. Okay, so is it a positive view? Is it a negative view? What is it talking about? What is it saying about civil rights? And then you go on to talk about how interpretation 2 might be different. Okay, so it might be, if interpretation 1 was positive, is interpretation 2 negative? And you consider what the key statements are. What are they saying and how are they different? Now, to step up from that, now this has been put as a star task for you. Another type of question is, why are these two interpretations different? You might suggest one reason why sources differ throughout history. Now, we all have different experiences of history, and we all have our own biases because of how we've been raised, how we've been educated, our social experience. So you have to consider the provenance and the purpose of these sources, which is who has written them, essentially, and what's the reason why they have written them, and why would that make those sources differ. So you can have a go at that if you would like to. And your final task today is to complete the Microsoft Form quiz, and this link is included as a hyperlink in your worksheet. If you have any problems accessing that, please do just email me and I can forward you a copy. At the end of this, make sure that you send any work that you've completed to your class teacher, whether that be the worksheet itself or a picture or a screenshot of the worksheet. However you need to get it to your teacher, you can do that in whatever format is best for you.